it's a great question. In some ways, it's the question. And I was talking about it earlier that there's a lot of debate about the Tumbler Ridge mine. But in the long run, I think we have to acknowledge that if we don't have skilled workers from the region, and you have projects that are important and raise a lot of royalty for the province, that money comes to Victoria, may go back. A lot of people in the north don't like how that works sometimes, I think it's fair to say. If we don't have people from the region working in those jobs, and those jobs aren't using suppliers in the region as much as they need, then there's front-end construction jobs, but often you have the impacts of the mines without any of the benefits. And that's a significant problem in regions, so skills training is important in that sense. If you look at your areas of the north, you've got an undersupply of labor in the northeast, which has significant impacts, I'm sure, on costs, but also on economic development itself. You can't find enough workers, it affects economic development. In the northwest, we're seeing that as well. So here's just a few thoughts about that. One, just because you talked about the regulatory climate, no capital tax, not coming. No change in the small business tax. For the election, we're seeing where the corporate income tax is going to go, which is from 10 to 12%. As you know, the government announced in its last budget they're going from 10 to 11%. And there's a debate about that, but that's not, I think, a significant change with that money going to largely to invest in infrastructure in regions. And I think the question raises a good point, which is in the north we have the young population is also increasingly First Nations. And the realism of having people go from Hazelton or Terrace or Prince George or wherever down to Vancouver and then come back, and the success of that has generally not been high. So we absolutely have to invest. We've got outstanding institutions across the province, but I don't think the investment we have in trades and training is adequate in the north. So we've got to do two sets of things, it seems to me, to prepare for that. One, yes, increase the spaces, though. We have to focus, I think, especially in trades and training in the north, because that's where the jobs are, and realistically, that's where the people are going to come from to fill those jobs. That also will require, I think, a different focus in K-12 education. You know, I go to a lot of graduation ceremonies, and you always get the same impression. There's an impression in the room sometimes that the people who've succeeded are the people who are going to go to UBC or UBCO or SFU or UVic or perhaps a university outside of the province. When the reality is, and I went to one of those institutions, I went to UBC, that today your ability to be creative is actually far greater often when you go and focus on trades and training. You can become an entrepreneur, you can work all over the world, you can own your own business, you can do almost anything you want, whereas a BA or a BSc might not lead to such variety of opportunity. But we are not, I don't think, in our entire system encouraging people to go in that direction. So I think that's the direction we need to go in. More training opportunities in the north, and that means that's the priority. Right? That means that's the priority. That means we don't spend money on other things, because that's the priority. Ensuring that people in the north have access to good paying jobs when they come in the north. Because if our future is people without jobs, and there's relatively high unemployment in many regions of the north, in spite of all the economic development that's happening, right? And jobs without people, where we have to essentially import labor, that's not a good future either economically or socially for the province, and it's something we as a generation can do something about. So I feel that's got to be the priority of government. So come here, speak to you in our first year, I'll talk about skills training. In our second year, talk about skills training. In our third year, talk about skills training. And that is why I think we've got to improve the democratic debate as well, because that project is going to take government sustaining it no matter who's elected, whether it's Premier Clark or myself or someone else. That's a project that's going to require a decade of government and industry action together to succeed on. And so we need to make that clear before the election so that people don't see immediate benefits after 6 months when it takes 2 or 3 or 4 years to train people, that they don't say, well, what are you doing? We have to campaign on it before the election, say that's what we're going to do, and that's going to be the #1 priority of an NDP government.